These are removal instructions for the mass airflow sensor on the M271 engines found on the C230 compressor engines through 03 to 05. The mass airflow is right there. The first things you want to do when you remove your MAF is you want to disconnect the negative terminal on the battery. You want to release these clips. And then pull out the hook. So this hook goes in there. Release it. There's your battery. What you want to do is just disconnect that terminal, which is the negative. After removing the air hose, we will focus on the back. So there's several things in here that you need to disconnect. The first one is the connector to the mass airflow sensor. There's depression clips on each side. Just hold it and pull it out. Next, there's a wiring harness that's here. Originally, it's actually clipped onto the air tube right here. So this is the MAF. The air goes down like this and down towards the bottom. And then there's a clip here. There's a rail here that clips onto the bottom of this. As you can see, there's a rail here. Next thing you want to do is locate the brake booster vacuum hose. As you can see, there's the head of the hose right here, and right on the bottom there's like a circular ring that's made of plastic. You want to depress on either side, and then that releases the pressure on it, allowing you to pull it out. So press and then pull up, just like that. So it's disengaged, and that's the tube right there. The way you remove this is you pull this out, and that disengages it. Pull it up. What I also like to do is I like to inspect the ceilings here to see if there's any oil. The rear, same thing. It's actually on the back. It might be a little tight here, so you can get a flathead to push the other side. Just like that. This is the front of the airbox. Pressure clip on that side. Press it and then it should just slide out. And that's your connector. The last thing you want to remove is crankcase ventilation hose, which is this one right here. This line is a vacuum hose, which is connected to just right after the MAF, mass airflow sensor, in the intake pipe. And this draws a lot of vacuum. You want to buy this hose as a replacement because it's in such a close proximity to the engine. It does get extremely hot, and it can brittle the rubber hose and cause a vacuum leak. And I believe that is the part number for this hose, the hose I was just referring to. There's two torque screws, one just behind the ECU connector right there, and the torque bit is E10. On the other side, in this hole, it's also a E10 Torx. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just in there. E10 Torx does not fit on this side. I've just opted for an 8mm hex, and that fits perfectly in here. Screws don't actually come all the way out. They're an integral part of the airbox, so you don't have to be afraid of losing them. A very nice trick is to get yourself some air duct putty. You can find these in the Home Depot or any hardware store in the I guess the duct aisle. These are meant for sealing leaks in your air duct in your home. What these are used for is to actually keep the bolts we just removed. Like I said, they were integrated into the air box, so you can't actually take them out. What this does is that you can pull the screw up, attach a piece of putty onto the threads so it doesn't drop back down. And the reason why you want to do that is because if it keeps constantly dropping into its slot, you're gonna have a very hard time removing the air box. Alright, here comes probably the hardest part for most people. You have to disconnect the hose clamp that's very deep. It's way past the MAF. Essentially the air hose does a 90-degree turn and it starts heading down vertically towards the supercharger. And what you see right there, if you look closely, is on top you'll see a worm type hose clamp. That is not from factory. Like I said before, I removed my mass airflow sensor a few times already, and I opted to replace the compression clamps that you see that's right on the bottom of that. You see those two hooks? Those are the factory hose clamps that comes with this car. And what you need to remove that is a flexible hose clamp plier. And it looks just like this. So you have the handle of the plier and then an extension, and you have this. You see these two hooks. When you pull on that, it depresses and it releases the tension. And I got this part off of eBay for I think $20 or less. And if you're gonna do this removal, you want to make sure you have this part ready on hand, because I would say it's near impossible to remove without one of these tools. And if you do remove it, I would most definitely buy some worm hose clamps to replace it. This is what you'll need to tighten the screw during your installation process with the new worm clamps. Or if you already have worm clamps, this would actually help. It's actually a lot better than a flathead. It's very hard to reach even with a very long flathead screwdriver. Depending on your worm clamp, for me I have an 8mm screw on the worm clamp. So these are the individual parts of the extension, the 8mm socket, I think that's quarter. Adapter, a hex to socket adapter, it's also a quarter. The extension itself comes like this as a piece, and then my screwdriver with the socket to hex adapter. Alright, here comes the fun part. It's removing the air box from the engine bay. So how this air box is connected to the engine itself is those two screws that I removed in the back, the E10 screws, and then there's two rubber grommets that are like this, literally in this position on the engine on both sides, right under here and right under here. And then there's a peg that goes inside. The peg is a part of the airbox, and the grommet is part of the engine. You will notice it's actually rather difficult to push it towards the rear, because as you can see, there's a fuel hose as well as the oil filter housing is just right behind the airbox, right there. So there's not a lot of room to push, but there is enough to get it out. So as you can see, it's already very loose. So a good tip is to actually, before you push, grab onto the air hose, which is a hard plastic, and pull it up first, because I find that disengages it faster. So as you push back, lift this hose, and as you can see, the pegs are coming out. Make sure all the wires are free. There we go, you got one side out, this side's out. Keep pulling this up. There we go. Okay, you see that peg? That's now out. This is the grommet that's attached to the engine, and that's the peg that's on the airbox, and it's on both sides. The reason why it's so hard, which I'll show you later, is because it's a very stiff. There's a metal vacuum hose line as part of the brake booster. That's the intake manifold. Right under that is your supercharger. This is the throttle body, all the wiring harnesses that we were unplugging. This is the airbox. This is that hose I was just referring to. So that's connected to the valve cover, and it connects to the intake on the bottom. So if you want to remove this hose, replace it, you also have to probably remove the airbox to access this. That's the MAF. So in order to remove the MAF, there's 3 screws. 2 on top, there's 1 right in that hole. What is that? Torx. And the reason why you have to remove the airbox is because there's another screw right on the bottom, and it's impossible to reach if you don't take out the airbox. And I want to show you the putty that I spoke about. So you see how I pull the screw out and then put the putty inside? That way it doesn't drop through. See, there's clearance, so you can pull the airbox out. So the removal of the airbox along with the mass airflow sensor also is a procedure that you'll need to perform if you want to remove the so-called $12 hose. And the hose itself is actually right here. This end connects to the, it's just right past the throttle body, so it creates vacuum, and it connects right into the engine. It's actually a 3-part hose. The other 2 is impossible to get to if you don't remove the supercharger, but this is the hose itself. It commonly cracks right where I have that hose clamp, which is supposed to be here, but I just removed it. It commonly tears right there. If you look at pictures, you'll see what I mean. I inspected my hose and it looks fine. Removing the 3 screws that's holding the mass airflow sensor housing to the airbox. That's a T25 Torx. After you remove the 3 screws, you can actually directly remove the mass airflow sensor, which is right there. You might have a hard time pulling it out because there is a O-ring. You want to fit it behind the brake booster vacuum line. So what you want to do is you want to tilt it so it's down on the front, slide it into the pegs first, and then try to maneuver the rubber hose around the intake. You want to make sure that the hose is completely around the tube.